Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for October 4th, 2024. First off, today we'll go to KSL to learn about how some true-believing Mormons feel about the temple building. It says on October 5th, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will hold its 194th semi-annual General Conference. One of the most anticipated events at General Conference is the announcement of new temples worldwide. I love the surprise of when President Russell M. Nelson announces one and where it's going to be, one church member, Celia, said. Since Russell M. Nelson was called as the president of the church in 2018, 168 new temples have been announced and nearly 40 have been dedicated. Additionally, 3 more dedications are planned for later this month. When people travel far to go to the temple and they finally get temples in their area, they get really excited. I would be excited too. I've lived close to temples all my life, said Libby, also a church member. You can hear all 5 sessions of General Conference, as well as special content in between sessions, right on KSL News Radio. And now we will go to the ex-Mormon subreddit for a post with the title, "Members Are Slandering Me." It says, "I've been pulling away from the church for a while now, and all was well, slowly leaving without making it obvious. Since then, I've, UK-based, had social services called on me with slanderous accusations, and when I found out who was calling them, I discovered it was a group of women at the church who basically said, because my upbringing wasn't the best and I haven't been attending church, they had a duty to safeguard my children to ensure they have support. I don't know how to handle this or if this is normal for the church. I want out. I want out so badly. Joining was the worst decision I've ever made." When I read this, it hit close to home. I had a brother who left the church years ago, and when my dad found out, he called my brother's in-laws and told them that my brother left the church and was likely no longer going to be a good father, so they just needed to keep an eye to make sure he was going to take care of his kids. Now we will go to the church newsroom for an article about some sustainings. It says, at the General Conference leadership session of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, on Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, 6 new Area 70s were presented for a sustaining vote. This struck me as odd for a couple of reasons. First of all, I didn't know that they had a General Conference leadership session, and the fact that they're sustaining people there and not doing it in front of the general church membership is really weird. Now I'm going to read through the people who were sustained because I always find it interesting who gets chosen for these callings and how it appears that they've been groomed to be in these positions by first having either successful jobs or gradually having higher and higher callings throughout their lives. It says, in the 3rd Quorum of the 70 Africa Central, Africa South, and Africa West areas, Jean-Pierre A.L. Haboko, 57, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Coordinator Seminaries and Institutes of Religion, currently serving as Ward Temple and Family History Leader of the Kimwala 2nd Ward, former Bishop, Bishopric Counselor, Mission President, Stake Presidency Counselor, and Stake President. Wife, Jolie, 10 children. Next is George Katembo Jogu Munin, 47, Nairobi, Kenya, Managing Director, Simplify IT Limited, currently serving as a counselor in the Kenya-Nairobi West Mission Presidency, former Stake Presidency Counselor and Stake President. Wife, Sarah, 3 children. Then in the 6th Quorum of the 70, Caribbean, Central America, and Mexico areas, Ramiro Ibarra Sanchez, 55, Guaymas, Mexico, manufacturing engineer, currently serving as president of the Guaymas, Mexico stake, former bishop, bishopric counselor, high counselor, and stake president. Wife, Itzel Janelli, 4 children. Francisco Villanueva Rojas, 44, Santa Cruz, Jojocotlan, Mexico, Federal Court Judicial Actuary, Mexico Government, currently serving as Self-Reliance Group Facilitator of the Independencia Ward, former Bishop and Stake President, wife, Esther, 2 children. And then in the 9th Quorum of the 70, South America Northwest and South America South areas, Miguel A. Avila, 40, Lima, Peru, CEO, MTJ General Service SAC, recently released as President of the Trujillo, Peru, Jerusalem Stake, former Bishopric Counselor, High Counselor, Stake Presidency Counselor, and Stake President. Wife, Flor, 3 children. And last, A. Enrique Tahira, 42, Lombari, Paraguay, O&M Regional Manager, Meeting House Facilities, currently serving as Assistant Area Auditor of the Paraguay Asuncion North Assistant Area Audit Office. Former Bishop and Bishopric Counselor, wife Zanir Elena, 2 children. Then it says, Area 70s are church leaders called by the First Presidency to be witnesses of the name of Christ and to assist the 12 in building up the church and regulating all the affairs and preaching and administering the gospel. gospel in their assigned areas. They act under the keys and direction of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Area 70s are called and set apart to serve in specific geographical areas, but may also be assigned to serve in other areas as needed. They are not called to full-time service and typically serve for 5 years. Their duties include meeting and counseling with local church leaders to help them fulfill their responsibilities. Each Area 70 also belongs to a Quorum of the 70. There are currently 12 Quorums of the 70. More Quorums of the 70 may be added as the church grows. There are two things that stuck out in that paragraph for me. The first one is where it says they are to be witnesses of the name of Christ. I think that's a change in more recent years. They used to say they were witnesses of Christ. Now it's the name of Christ. The other thing that it made me wonder is I know that they get a stipend during this time. When they become emeritus general authorities, do they continue to get that stipend for the rest of their lives? Because they really cannot be a general authority in this capacity and keep a full-time job. So if they serve for 5 years, they likely wouldn't have a job to go back to unless it was a company they owned and then someone just ran it for them for 5 years and then they slipped back into that position. Overall, the most shocking thing, though, is that they sustained these men without the general membership of the church present, which led me to the church website to the topic of common consent, where it says, after the restoration of priesthood authority, the Lord commanded Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery not to ordain each other as elders and leaders in the church until other believers could decide by vote whether they were willing to accept Joseph and Oliver's leadership. One of Joseph's first actions at the organizational meeting of the church on April 6, 1830, was to call for such a vote. He asked those assembled to show whether they approved of him and Oliver as teachers and whether they should organize the church according to revelation. The members voted unanimously in favor. A July 1830 revelation reiterated that all things shall be done by common consent in the church by much prayer and faith. Early church members conducted business by common consent, sustaining leaders and decisions by vote. Early church leaders adopted procedures used in other organizations, such as raising hands to vote, in their attempts to fulfill the Lord's command that business be conducted by common consent. Formalities like calling meetings to order, sustaining officers and decisions by vote, keeping minutes, and announcing agenda items had become commonplace in many different organizations during the previous century. Churches, government bodies, and private clubs alike employed similar procedures, taking the British House of Commons as their model. By the 1820s, most Americans, including Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, took these parliamentary procedures for granted as the way meetings should be run. These forms helped set apart church meetings, including the founding meeting, as legitimate or official rather than informal gatherings. The practice of conducting, so it says practice there, not commandment. I don't know how they differentiate when it's still in canonized scripture. The practice of conducting church business by common consent sometimes resulted in contrary votes. A revelation in 1841 even recognized the possibility of the saints not ratifying callings issued by revelation. A commandment I give unto you, the Lord declared, that you should fill all these offices and approve of those names which I have mentioned, or else disapprove of them at my general conference. Some members at an 1841 conference objected to retaining the elders' quorum president, a bishop, a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and a counselor in the Nauvoo High Priest Quorum presidency. The respective quorums subsequently met in councils to reconsider these callings. At a conference in 1843, Joseph Smith questioned Sidney Rigdon's fitness to serve as a counselor in the first presidency. Other leaders spoke out in support of Rigdon, and the assembled church members voted to retain him in his calling against Joseph's initial wishes. Joseph begrudgingly accepted the result. Over time, debate in church conferences and sacrament meetings was increasingly viewed as disruptive. Church leaders began to instruct those presiding over meetings to answer any objections raised during a sustaining vote outside of the meeting. I think it is amazing that they actually admitted that. The Lord commanded them to vote and decide things by common consent, but it didn't matter because church leaders increasingly viewed it as disruptive. So then they instructed people to do it outside of the meetings. It goes on to say, nonetheless, the same vigorous discussion continues today in ward stake mission and general church councils. They might have vigorous discussion, but voting opposed to anyone in the highest church callings does absolutely nothing. There's no way they would take someone out of the first presidency, Quorum of the 12, or likely even the Quorum of the 70, even if a large portion of the membership voted opposed. It then says, Latter-day Saints continue to conduct church business by common consent. They do not actually do that. Those who cast opposing votes are referred to their local leaders to discuss their concerns. Those who vote in favor seek to sustain leaders and programs not only with their vote, but also through their actions, faith, and prayers. If you want to learn more about common consent and how it has evolved from a practice with meaning to a mere formality, Radio Free Mormon did an amazing episode discussing it called Illegitimate First Presidency. You should absolutely go give it a listen. In the last general conference in April, likely to avoid people voting opposed in person, the sustaining vote, which had previously happened during the Saturday afternoon session, was, without warning, moved to the Saturday morning session. The leaders really do not want people voting opposed. Not only will it not change anything, but it makes them look bad. And today we will finish with this quote from an Instagram account that I follow called Raising Yourself. It says, "We, society, need to stop telling kids that compliance equals respect. It does not. Kids need to be taught discernment and be empowered to say no to adults who misuse and abuse their power." For some reason, I found that oddly fitting when it comes to the Mormon Church. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.